Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anand Swamy. I'm on the faculty here in the economics department, and I'll be coordinating this panel entitled Whither, Washington Consensus, Perspectives on Development Strategy. So I'll begin by introducing our issues, then I'll tell you about our panelists and ask them to make their presentations. We've all agreed to keep our comments to a maximum of 10 minutes, so there should be plenty of time for questions and for discussion. So many of you here are familiar with the ideas of the Washington Consensus. Joe Stiglitz discussed them last night, and I expect Danny Roderick will tonight. Their perspective is that of an engaged and socially committed academic. Our panelists will complement their talks by providing the perspective of the development practitioner, people in government, in international organizations, doing the hands-on work of development policy, in the trenches, as Toga put it to me yesterday. So I'm going to use India as an example to motivate the debate around the Washington Consensus. So our story starts in the 1980s. By then, it had become clear that economic growth and development in India, however you wanted to measure it, was not satisfactory. Per capita income, literacy, life expectancy were all very low. A huge fraction of the labor force was still in low productivity agriculture. And this was in a country with a stable political system, no obvious geographical disadvantages, and one might note, many internationally renowned economists. So why were these outcomes so bad? The following arguments became very influential for India and for the rest of the world. The problem, it was said, was that in countries like India, the model of economic development gave too large a role to government. Too large in what sense? First, the government owned and ran too much of the economy. It made steel, heavy electricals, ran the railways, provided the electricity, owned the banks, etc. Critics argued that it did all these things badly, at high cost, usually employing far too many people for a given amount of work. What was the solution? To reduce the role of government by selling off enterprises. In a word, privatization. Second, the critics said, the economy was too close to the rest of the world. Tariffs and quotas kept out foreign goods. They protected Indian industry from competition and kept it inefficient. Also, the government discouraged foreign investment. This kept out foreign capital and foreign technology, both of which the country needed. So what was the solution? Reduce tariffs, quotas, and be more welcoming to foreign investment. In a word, globalize. Third, the government had a maze of regulations. Firms were told how much they could produce and where they should produce it. Banks were told what interest rates they could charge and who they should lend money to. Employers were prevented from laying off workers when they were no longer needed. All this encouraged inefficiency and corruption. The solution? The government should stop micromanaging the economy. It should, in a word, liberalize. These policy prescriptions and others pertaining particularly to macroeconomic stability were recommended not just for India, but for the developing world more generally. They were listed in a famous article by an economist called John Williamson, who labeled them the Washington Consensus. That's where the word comes from. Like other controversial terms, the Washington Consensus came to mean somewhat different things to different people. But there was a core idea, a mindset, if you like. Governments need to be very modest about their role in the economy. Much of the time, they are the problem, not the solution. Many of you would have heard Joe Stiglitz describe this mindset last night. So what happened in India? Especially after 1991, the economy did become more open for foreign goods and to foreign investment. When I was growing up in India, there were only two types of cars on the road. One was called a Fiat, and the other was called an Ambassador. Now there's a profusion of them, and you can buy a BMW if you can sell an arm and a leg. The economy also did liberalize. I recall an industrialist friend telling me once in the 1980s that he needed 47 licenses before he could open a factory. That would not be true now. There's been some privatization also, but on a limited scale. So what's been the outcome? Many argue that at least some prescriptions of the Washington Consensus have worked. Isn't the Indian economy a huge success story? Isn't it growing at 9% where it once used to grow at 3%? Others point to a darker side of the growth process. Job creation has been slow, inequality is increasing, and malnutrition remains at an extremely high level. What's the point of growing if you can't feed the kids? These critics would ask. So critics of the current policies want the government to do more effectively in social insurance, health, education, nutrition. But as far as I know, nobody is calling for a return to an inward-looking economy or for going back to what used to be called license permit Raj, or the rule of license and permit. So in my view, the fundamental issue the Washington Consensus raised about the appropriate role of government is still on the table. We need more data, more case studies, more learning from people engaged in development work. And we're delighted to have 4 such people here today. I'm going to give very brief introductions of our panelists. The details are on the CDE website. So first on my left, Rafat Hasanov has worked in various policy and applied research positions in Kyrgyzstan, including a 9-year stint as Deputy Minister of Finance and head of the Economic Policy Department at the Office of the President. Since 2003, he has worked with the Investment Roundtable, an NGO known for its contribution to economic reform in the Kyrgyz Republic. He is a CDE alum. Ana Maria Rodriguez, also a CDE alum, has been at the Inter-American Development Bank since 1991, where she occupied various technical, managerial, and advisory positions. She's currently senior advisor to the president of the Inter-American Development Bank. Toga Macintosh is the World Bank Executive Director for 22 countries across Africa. Before this, he was Minister of Planning in Liberia and an Executive Director for the Liberian Governance and Reform Commission. He's also been the Managing Director of a development consultancy in Botswana and also a senior economist at the UN. Stephen Lewis Jr. has been a professor of economics and provost at Williams and president of Carleton College. He worked with the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning in Botswana from 1975 until the late 1990s, and has also worked in several other African countries and the Philippines. So I'm delighted we have such a distinguished group to talk today. Let's get started. I'd like to start by asking Rafkat to speak.
It is a great pleasure to be here. I'm really delighted to get an invitation, be a speaker. It's a great challenge to me to speak after Joseph Stiglitz. But for me, it's also a good opportunity because I really can't complain against his findings, and he cannot. So, actually, I also can echo his findings, his speech, and you can give me some applause, and I stop talking. But actually, opposite my country demonstrates something interesting phenomena. Academia always work on panel equations, and you frequently describing average country that should follow particular prescriptions. But when I look at all of this equation, Kyrgyzstan always on the edge of conditional interval. It means that it is easy for Kyrgyzstan to change plans to minus, and it also means that probably economic policy will not work for Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan became famous due to political events in my country. You might know revolution in this year, ethnic conflict in June of this year, first revolution in 2005. So we experienced a lot of problems on political arena, but also my firm feeling that because of problems with the economy. And I'm going to speak a little bit about structural transformation in the country and whether Washington consensus influence it or not. I prefer to speak with the slides because you can see maybe more details than I am going to present, and it can provoke some discussion. What we have done since 91, when we got independence, we fully liberalize external trade, capital flows, we do liberalize economy in the country, we did a lot of deregulation policy and privatize almost all state assets. Basically, I can sense that all 10 propositions that we have in this author, sorry, what's his name? Williamson. Williamson. We met mostly doing business index, economic freedom index, macroeconomic data. They just prove it. However, you might see some tricks with measurements, and if I have time, I can speak a little bit about this. IMF and World Bank team named Kyrgyzstan as the best performer in Central Asia in 90s. Also want to stress that in 2000 we got extremely good external environment because CS countries have been growing fast, create a lot of external demand for our goods. So this first graph shows that exactly Kyrgyzstan was the best performing. Red line, which going on the top of this diagram, shows that Kyrgyzstan by growth rate was the first in Central Asia. So, but what happens the next decade, and I call this lost decade? You know, it's completely opposite picture. The red line, which refers to Kyrgyzstan, now on the bottom. So what happened? Let me show structure of GDP by economic activities. You can see that really I don't see any structural transformation from this graph. Yes, agriculture, the share of agriculture went down, but industry did not grow a lot. Construction went down. Transport communication, we have some growth, but duty communication growth worldwide. We know this phenomenon with mobile telephones. Only trade and services went up. So it's clear that we follow market forces here because it's quite easy to organize business in trade sector and service sectors than in industrial sectors. I'm going to give you two examples when, on my opinion, the government intervention was needed. And those examples are really interesting that I will not be speaking about market failures. I will be speaking about blind following to the market forces that led our country to the economic track. So first is the creation for customs union that was created recently by 3 countries, Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan in 2010, and how it affected development of my country. The second is failure of agrarian reforms that we did in this sector. It was market-oriented reforms. So, first case, prior creation of the customs union. In my country, as I mentioned, we fully liberalized trade, external and internal. Kyrgyz Republic is the only member of WTO from CIS country. We introduced really low and often zero import tariffs. While CIS country having free trade agreements with Kyrgyzstan put heavy barriers on import from non-CIS countries. It is clear that following market forces, Kyrgyzstan became a hub of re-export of Chinese goods to CIS countries. I'll show some slides. First slide. Last 5 years, how external trade growing. It's tremendous shift in our external trade. You'll see it's 100% of growth. Why is that? Answer is simple. import from China went up, and re-export is a red line. Also, as a share of whole export went up tremendously. What we have now in 2010? Customs union countries introduced full ban on re-export from Kyrgyzstan and created a whole bouquet of other barriers. Results you see, 38% of businessmen reported that re-export decreased by 40%. Other 38 say, okay, by 80, and 6% close those business. I'm going to give you a few questions and give you just a second break to formulate your answer, but I don't expect your answers verbally. First question, was this predictable 3-5 years ago? Second question, could the government do anything 3 or 5 years ago? Did government what was needed? So my answers. For first question, yes. For second questions, of course, yes. And third question, no. I'm going to give you what should be done from my point of view. The recipe is really simple. We have to localize production of goods that we re-exported. Of course, implementation is difficult of this recipe, but it was possible just to increase investment from China to the country. And because we have abundance of workforce, we could do any, of course it was difficult to replace all re-export. It can, by estimation of Chinese customs, about $9 billion. So GDP, as I mentioned, only 5.5 in Kyrgyzstan. But at least we could do something. A second, little bit more difficult example, but please follow. So we, probably most of us who attended transition classes in CDE know that in the Soviet Union we had a lot of Soviet-style collective farms called kolkhoz or sovkhoz. And we did reform to dissolve those kolkhozes and sovkhozes, and we focused on individual farms. So first of all, we introduced so-called right on use of land, which is close to private ownership, but now we have full title of private ownership on land in the country. Because of we focusing on individual farms, we created more than 400,000 farms, individual farms. Let me remind you that only 5 million people live in Kyrgyzstan. Of course, average size of each farm is really small. I believe I overestimated this 2 hectares, probably less than 2 hectares. Of course, for small farms, they use only their labor. Basically, it's natural economy, farming subsistence level. I will show in a minute slides that prove it. The worst outcome of this was that we have labor outflows, not only from agriculture to the other sector of economy. Basically, it went to migration. People just move from our country. Kyrgyz people move from our country to Russia and Kazakhstan to try to earn money. And the reason is not growth of labor productivity, the reason is the low earnings in this sector. So this picture is just proves that agriculture is natural economy. Because you can see that most of agricultural goods goes to either to agriculture or to households directly. Just few small percent goes for further agro-processing, only 12%, and now this share even low. We were able, till 2005, only to sell abroad only 3% of agricultural goods. This picture also really amazing. It's value added in agriculture per capita. So after breakdown of Soviet Union, so we got very big transformation crisis. It's about in 99, the reforms that we've done brought some results, some success at that time. We reached the level of 99. Kyrgyzstan actually was the first country that reached level of 99, 91 in CS region. But look at 2002 and further. So, Professor Douglas, Golin, what reminds you? Solo model, exactly, solo model. So, it means that we don't have any technological progress in agriculture so far. So, a few questions. Was the outcomes of reform predictable? Was the government able to correct reforms? The answer is simple, yes for both. Yes for both. Because if you have stagnation of your production since 2002, it's all flat line. So, of course, you have to see something wrong with your economy. So, what should do? Again, recipe is simple, but implementation rather difficult. First of all, think what market needs from your rural sector. Our potential consumers, it's in Russia, are big networks of large grocery stores. They need supply of one type of agricultural commodities of similar quality and in large quantities. So, government policy should be focused on this, how to force farmers to cooperate and use similar technology to create such type of goods. It could be fiscal and credit, 5 minutes?
Overtime.
Overtime, okay. Fiscal and credit and training and marketing. So I'm going to finish with 2 slides. So what kind of practical advices I be in my mind? This reflects my practical experience. Most of propositions of Washington consensus are necessary conditions, but not sufficient ones. I really don't like privatization, how it was done. And I go to Stiglitz with some exemptions that I support small privatization, not big scale privatization. Blind following to market forces can trap your economy. That is why government interference is needed, but it should be well designed. First of all, create strategic vision of the sector development by trying to narrow coverage. Go to subsector, even to particular goods. So think about development of goods. Set up clear objectives that are measurable. It's, you should know where you're going and what you want to achieve. Think about windows opportunities rather than about specific set of policy instruments. For example, tax incentive. It's not good if you just focus on one type of tools we have. It's interesting to know that it's CDE and some other economic institution, we all speaking about set of policies, but instrument that country uses, it's different. It's, as a rule, development programs that work with windows of opportunities. Create monitoring and evaluation mechanism. It's clear, let me don't go in detail, but ask business what to do. Consult with them. Create platform for public-private dialogue. It's clear that they can bring a lot of new ideas to your thinking. And few sentences about institution. First of all, have institutional memory. If you had positive experience in the past, please use it. Don't forget it. Please use it. You need to focus on coordination of private sector development, but please don't mix it with the planning, as was done in common economy. It's different phenomenon. And better coordinating role of the government means that you have to first think how to improve quality of governments. So it's a huge topic, and I decided to stop talking on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafkat. Our next speaker is Ana Maria Rodriguez.
And I'm going to speak here from the table. Good afternoon. I'm really honored to be invited to be part of this panel at the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the CDE. I am extremely grateful to the CDE and Williams College. My year in CDE was life-changing for good reasons and only in positive ways. I owe much of my professional development to the solid principles that I learned here, largely because I was taught to keep thinking and keep thinking always. Here I became a better human, chiseled by the variety, richness, and generosity of my teachers, colleagues, and friends from around the world. Thanks, Professor Sheehan. You gave me the chance at this time this year, and I'm thankful up to today. As honored as I am, I was a little concerned when Professor invited me to be in a panel with such brilliant people. I'm a practitioner. I have seen a lot of things, but I'm not a researcher. So what could I say regarding industrial policy after Washington Consensus? So, scared a little, I sought refuge in my experience. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it is and what lessons I can take from that. I was born in a coffee region under the import substitution star. I came to the CDE to learn about the Washington Consensus. I started my professional career at the IDB, promoting the closing of public development banks that were broken. I outlived the theory that the best productive policy is not policy at all. I design and really agonize over small projects that are beautiful patches of green, but did not scale up. I champion the importance of improving the business environment. I timidly explore more active policies to improve productivity and became an activist of public policies to foster innovation. And I am, almost a quarter century later, still curious about the topic. There is only limited data to evaluate seriously the Latin American experience with productive development policies. That is scattered, and time horizons for the evaluation of programs are undefined. Nevertheless, a dozen, which fit in 10 minutes, practice could be drawn from this quilted evidence. The first is the overarching lesson. There is no easy answer. Productive policies or their rejection require careful analysis, informed reasoning, and good judgment. Roderick, we're going to see tonight, put it beautifully when he said that nothing replaces thinking. The second lesson would be that the unseen hand is grand, but market and coordination failures slow down economic development. Despite macroeconomic reforms, Latin America suffers from chronic low growth and very low productivity. According to an IDB study, a typical Latin American country would have a per capita income higher by 54% if its productivity had grown like the rest of the world, and would almost double if its productivity were close to its full potential. An interesting case is Chile, the shining example of orthodoxy in Latin America. The country has increased the scope and depth of its promotion of productive policies in 2000 as a response to a declining dynamism of growth once the initial positive effects of the macroeconomic reforms to productivity wore down. After a steady increase in productivity of 3.1% between 86 and 97, the productivity gains fell to a sluggish 0.6% between 98 and 2007. So comes the third. Not surprisingly, productive policies have been active and actually never stopped in Latin America after the Washington Consensus. Pragmatism has been the rule of the game. Brazil, for example, never stopped its direct support to specific industries and continue to have a very, very active program of directed credit to promote what considers strategic sectors. Colombia, my country, has the business plans for world-class sectors that focus on needs of existing and promising sectors. I mentioned Chile before, and there are a lot of examples. But one thing that I love is that Chilean consultants are the new advocates of good productive policies around Latin America. And I love it because it's like Nixon going to China. They can do it because they cannot be suspected of heresy. The fourth lesson would be that doing these policies, the traditional promotion of investment, particularly foreign investment, is not enough. A recent study by the IDB made clear that Latin America does not suffer so much from insufficient investment as from low productivity growth. So maybe, again, the unseen hand may need a helping hand that promotes better ways of using existing resources. One important lesson for me is that macroeconomics do set the stage, but microeconomic analysis is required to understand, design, and monitor productive policies. The problem is that there are more macroeconomists in policy making and business administrators lobbying them than well-informed microeconomists are practitioners in the ground. The sixth lesson would be that the provision of public goods and horizontal interventions are preferable, but may be insufficient. Once you cross this broad, let's call tenet, comfort zone, you're doomed to peak. If you have to peak, favor sectors that have proven record and an identified market, or favor general technology platforms as information technologies that will have positive spillover effects on other sectors. Support for innovation is an excellent bet, but to be effective, it has to be focused. That means you have to pick. One lesson that was hard for me to learn is that, of course, small is beautiful, but for productivity, big is better. There is a frequent confusion between social policy and productive policy when supporting micro and small enterprises. Many small firms show very low productivity, particularly in the informal sector that is very large in Latin America and the Caribbean. The IDB productivity study documents consistently higher levels of productivity and increasing productivity in larger firms in Chile, Uruguay, Colombia, El Salvador, Venezuela, and Bolivia. Something that you mentioned already, which I completely agree, joint exploration between public and private sector is essential. When designing and implementing productive policies, a strong leadership from the public sector is necessary, and also is very important an active participation of the private sector, including co-financing the cost of implementation. As you mentioned also, even in the best designed policies, beware of the public sector failures, such as inconsistency, risk of capture, and principal agent problems. Unfortunately, there is too much evidence in Latin America of the poor delivery mechanisms to implement productive policies, of overlapping structures and limited coordination, of rent-seeking, and of lack of effective monitoring and evaluation. To manage this risk, it is necessary to have a strategic plan in mind rather than ad hoc interventions, strong public institutions, adequate and predictable funds, transparency, public information, and monitoring and evaluation mechanism in place. More access to information and a more mature private and public sector exponentially increase the chances of success. The 10th lesson would be that coordination failures and information asymmetries do slow economic development. Efforts to promote and facilitate association and innovation have proved to be effective ways to increase productivity and create new markets. The pisco industry, like in the pisco sour in Peru, is a case in point, just to mention one example that merits a toast. So deliver services to improve business management and foster business alliances that promote innovation. The 11th lesson would be having clear goals, transitory interventions, and exit strategy and evaluation criteria are absolutely essential. And I'm going to quote, and I admire Andres Rodriguez, who has pointed out, and I quote, that the widespread concern about the dangers of microeconomic interventions springs in large part from the input substitution experienced. In most countries, the policy was captured by the protected firms, which pushed for wider and lengthier protection without taking the necessary steps to raise productivity and curb their dependence on high tariffs. So finally, I come to the 12th, maybe which should be the first. One size does not fit all. Policy interventions depend on economics, country governance, public institutions, private development, and recent history. This is extremely well illustrated in the support for rice production in Argentina, which was a success, and Costa Rica that was short of a failure in the same decade. Now, there is an official turnaround of the major Washington consensual parties. The recent speech by the president of the World Bank at Georgetown University attests to that. He publicly acknowledged that no one has a monopoly on the answers when talking about development economics. In the particular case of productivity and the Inter-American Development Bank, after being extremely cautious about it, last year the IDB formally stated that with the right economic policies, governments can do and can go a long way towards solving the productivity problem and hence accelerate growth. The IDB is still officially, and I'm not quoting here, the IDB is still officially very guarded when presenting specific recommendations, but we're still inclined to market-oriented horizontal policies, and we have a partiality for innovation. When pushing in a recent debate, a colleague of mine said, and I quote, "Productive development policies need to be proactive but restrained, as they have no guarantee of success and can be easily captured." So we have to have proactivity and restraint. That means that we're still looking for answers, and also that we're very good covering our backs. I had the best teachers at the CDE for 1 year. Later, I have had experience teaching me for 24 years. I learned from both that you always have to rely on honest, hard, and informed reasoning. The good thing, and I'm saying this borrowing from Goethe, is that thinking is more interesting than knowing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to ask Toga Macintosh, who's next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is all right.
Yes.
Good afternoon to everybody. Being back within the walls of the old building, the CDE building, after 34 years, 3-4, that's long enough. After 34 years, and recognizing most of the details, even in the house, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, and the dining rooms. I think it's a testimony of the magnificent trick that the mind can play. When you are away, you do not see these things, but 34 years later you come, and the bed looks the same, the bathroom looks the same.
Financial constraints.
But anyway, we are grateful for this invitation, and we are certainly honored to be given this opportunity to make a few comments on a subject that, in my view, and from what we've heard all of last night and a little bit today, a subject that was introduced primarily to deal with a set of structural and disequilibrium challenges in Latin America. It was put together to deal with disequilibrium challenges and structural challenges in Latin America with its own characteristics, which later on found itself beyond the boundaries of Latin America. We would like to also say that this particular subject matter was one of those subject matters in the literature that was subjected to a lot of misunderstanding, as well as a series of hard-nosed debates. And what was interesting about it, both the misunderstanding and the debates were amongst those who oppose it, as well as those who defended it. That makes it peculiar. I propose something, and somewhere in while I'm defending it, I still have a lot of doubts and misunderstanding of the issues. It is also a subject which has been discarded by many right from its inception. And as the debate went on, it was sort of discarded. And lately, that ranks of people who discarding this subject matter begin to grow and begin to swallow up even the inventor the person who invented the concept or the terminology, Williamson. 2000, he had the opportunity of reflecting a little bit more on this when he addressed the World Bank panel that was putting together the 2000 World Development Report. And let me just quote what John said at that time. Quote, 10 years ago, I invented the term Washington Consensus. The term, not a process, not a concept, the term, Washington Consensus. While it is jolly to become famous by inventing a term that reverberates around the world, I have long been doubtful as to whether the phrase that I coined served to advance the cause of rational economic policy making, unquote. 2000. He made this as an input into the development, the debate that was going on around the preparation of the World Development Report. What I would like to do, Mr. Chair, very quickly, is to just talk about what is troubling about this term. I'm using term because that's what he said. But even if I took it beyond term, I will include process and include prescriptions. What is troubling about it? What are those troubling issues as they relate particularly to our developing world? And I want to even narrow my developing world to Africa. And then later on, I might want to touch as I close on a couple of messages that I think that will evolve or that have evolved from the debate, the both sides of the debate. With respect to the question of the troubling issues, there were two critical points. One, how applicable were the prescriptions to our development needs and development requirements? Two, even if they were applicable, how suitable are these descriptions? This was the test of it from our perspective. On the question of applicability, the issue was, are the prescriptions sufficient? Are they necessary? Are they both sufficient and necessary? That is the debate within our own context. As a set, are they sufficient? And if sufficient, are they necessary? The second big question that floated around this thing, can the prescriptions be interpreted as one cast in stone, or should it be flexible? These were the cornerstone of the debate as it went beyond the Latin American framework. I presume some of these issues came up, including the Latin American framework, but certainly in terms of our part of the world, it was a question of should they be considered as something cast in stone, or should they allow for flexibilities and adjustments? So it is within this first set of issues that I think this shift towards moving this debate where it is finding itself now, getting outside of the terminology and disappearing from the literature, in effect, as we go along, came into play. On the question of suitability, the first one that I talked about is this whole question of applicability. But on the question of suitability, again, you both mentioned it right now. Is it a one-size-fits-all prescription? That dose for the med to heal us, to heal our economic wounds and whatever, is that dose one size fits all. You give the same malaria pill to Latin America, you give the same malaria pill to Africa and to Eastern Europe and Asia. Or these prescriptions, are they adaptable? You see, is it something that is just there, one set, or is it adaptable? And could the prescription themselves be mixed with other prescriptions? Can I take a vitamin tablet and what else? An aspirin? Or should I just take aspirin as prescribed by those who were proponents of the consensus? What were the side effects if I just took that dose? These were the issues, Mr. Chairman, that I thought were creating doubts in our minds. And as we saw the results, and I think that was mentioned last night, this result of destabilization, both not only in the economies, in the fundamentals of the economies, but destabilization even at the political level and the institutional level. And then breeding with them the inequalities. So what was there to solve a poverty or solve whatever problem led into these destabilizations and inequality issues. Having said that, though, there are some strong messages that we can take home. And when I kept thinking about those strong messages, particularly for us, the developing countries, it can help guide us. Us here have different levels. There are a set of countries that are post-conflicts. They have conflicts, and they're recuperating from those conflicts, where institutions, policies, structures were all dismantled, like in the case of Liberia, where I come from, and many other countries. Now, in that context, what kind of lessons we can take away that have derived out of this debate and take it beyond the debate? So rather than debating the validity of the argument, let's debate some of the things. Let me tell you what I just put here. I said, picking and taking home some of the goodies from the basket. The consensus is a basket. Can we go in there, look around in that basket, pick a couple of good things out of it, polish it, readjust it, and make some headway with it? That's a challenge. Because out of those 10 things that are listed in that basket, we see 2. I see 2. I see the formulation and implementation of sound fiscal policies. I think that's a good piece of apple in there. We can pick it up, because if we pick it up and we sort of adjust it and polish it up and do what we need to do, it could help us deal with our redistributive efforts, redistributive effects where the impact on poverty reduction agenda will be advanced, and certainly our development process will be consolidated. We can also see out of that basket, which is sound fiscal policies, the question of accountability. I mean, you have people, resources to manage as a government. You have to be accountable. You have to put in place the necessary processes, institutions, guidelines to be able to effectively deal with accountability. And with that, you can ensure the maximum utilization of your natural resources and your country's resources, which includes your human as well. So we can see that in that process. The second thing I see when you get in there, you want those good apples, is increasing investment in education, health, and infrastructure. What was interesting is that these were in the basket of those 10, but there was very little attention paid to that one. So if we were to measure the results over time of the consensus period, and we say, how much results have we derived from investment in education, health, and infrastructure, we will have a very poor scorecard. And so, but we need to take that out. We need to polish it a little bit. We need to realign it depending on where you are in your circumstances. And we think that's a very good apple we should go home with. Having done that, we need to adjust as we go along the way. We can't be stuck, it cannot be static. We have to adjust the process as we go. That means, for many of us, we will have to learn, for example, from the Chinese model. If you look at the Chinese model, and there's a lot have been said and a lot written in the literature, and I think we can still go there and see how you can really come up with policies, industrial policies, whatever, within your own constraints, and make progress and move a whole number of people out of poverty. So it's something we need to look at. Finally, he's telling me I got 5 minutes. But instead, I have 5 minutes according to, Finally, we must find the political will. We here, again, I'm in my region, must find the political will to integrate those parts that are doable within our today's development strategic frameworks. First, we are players in the core of these Washington institutions. When I was being introduced, I was introduced as one of the things said was I'm the executive director for 22 countries around the board of directors within the World Bank. That means we are members of that club. That organization has something for which members benefit. So we cannot stay on the periphery. We have to engage ourselves to make sure that we play and we play effectively. Secondly, we must maximize our returns from belonging, and we should intensify our contribution to the operations of these institutions. So it's going back in the basket, picking what's there good for us, realign it with the bank's own programming and everything, and we maximize our returns and benefits. So, Mr. Chairman, my submission here is as follows. One, the debate for and against has settled down. Two, all the prescriptions are not that bad for advancing structural transformation of a developing country. Three, we need to go into the basket, pick some of the good and manageable apples or prescriptions, brush them up where needed, and incorporate them into our development frameworks as applicable. And finally, four, we are players in the institutions that gave birth to the consensus. And what we need to do is to strategically position ourselves to maximize or participate in the benefits from those institutions, such as the IMF and the World Bank. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toga. Talking about development strategies and broad-range thinking, the panel is actually going according to a strategy. We started off with a paper about a particular country, Kyrgyzstan, moved on to Latin America, and we had the African continent and some big think from Toga. And Steve Lewis, who's our last speaker, has actually promised to shift focus a little bit away from the content of policy towards the decision-making process, towards the policy-making process. So, Steve.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nice to be here. And I note that in the front row is John Desprez, whose father, Emile Desprez, was the intellectual and moral godfather of the CDE, and so delighted to have you here, John, to celebrate this occasion. As the chairman said, I'm going to focus on the process of policymaking. To pick up from Toga, how do we decide which apples to pick, and how do we decide which ones to polish and how to polish them? In the 25th anniversary program at the CDE in 1985, Henry Bruton, who was, I think I'm the first person who's mentioned Henry today, a little bit yesterday everybody mentioned Henry, so you must feel neglected today, Henry. Henry and Paul Clark did a piece on policymaking, and they had a very arresting proposition in there, I thought, which is there's no such thing as good policy that can be separated from the process by which it is made. And so that's my theme here. In my experience in a number of different countries, in a number of different situations, it has seemed to me that the best policy processes, which also led to very good policies, involved a close working relationship between political leaders who had the ultimate decision-making authority and the people who were advising them on the technical matters, whether it was economists or geologists or biologists or botanists or agronomists or MDs or whatever it is. And that close relationship so that the politicians understand what the technicians are saying about the reality on the ground, and the technicians understand the constraints and the objectives that the politicians have, and they have an actual real conversation and exchange about that. That seems to me to produce good results. And if we get time, I'll give you an example of what I think was a good process and another which was not so good. The emphasis yesterday on asking questions, and Anna mentioned this afternoon keeping thinking. The issue of what are the facts on the ground against which decision-making must take place is extremely important. Toga mentioned this, and others have as well. And I have a simplistic approach to things, but as a woman who's my dean at Carleton for 13 years, she used to say occasionally, apparently what goes without saying doesn't go without saying. So what is the process? It seems to me that the process is looking, and this is both the politicians and the technicians, looking at the options and the trade-offs that are available, so that people understand what choices they are making, including a choice to not do anything. That's a choice, after all. What choices are being made, and what are the political and economic and social constraints and objectives against which these choices are being made? So in a sense, it's a very simple proposition. Executing it, I think, is a very difficult thing. I think my observation, there are many reasons for what we would all call bad policies. Sometimes it's poor analysis, sometimes it's laziness on the part of the civil servants who are supposed to be doing the analysis, sometimes it's corruption, sometimes it's ideology. We heard a couple of examples of that yesterday. Sometimes it's a lack of consultation and discussion. And as to give you an example, I'll spell it out if you want later, that even a policy choice that results in a terribly corrupt system that choice may have been made on the basis of an ideological preference for something like import licensing that had nothing to do in the minds of the people making that choice with the potential for corruption. It seems to me that there are two requirements for good policy making. One is a need to assess the costs and the benefits of alternatives, knowing the facts, understanding that there are many ways of skinning a cat or of achieving objective, and then a way of assessing and evaluating the costs or the benefits of those things. What are the results? What are the things we're trying to achieve? And again, this is easy to state, and in my experience, very difficult to do. And as I say, it requires the cooperation between economists and politicians. I think that the dichotomy which one often hears about, and I used to hear it from civil servants and economists in different countries, and they say, well, we knew what the right thing to do, but the politicians wouldn't let us do it. Or the complaint that was mentioned several times yesterday, no matter how many economists you lay end to end, they can't reach a conclusion. When you have politicians and economists blaming each other for not doing the right thing, that seems to me to be simply a demonstration that the policy-making process has not worked, that they were not listening to each other, they were not on the same page. One of the things that I always enjoyed about teaching at this CDE when I was here was the comparative experience. In one year, it's a class of 73, two of the brightest students in the class were Mr. Ng from Singapore and Sam Monsi from Lesotho. I defy you to find a generalization about economic policy or economic development that applies to all countries, including Lesotho and Singapore. And anytime somebody would make a generalization and say the nature of policy is such and such, one or the other would put his hand up and say, well, that doesn't apply here because, and he would lay out the facts on the ground. Now, I think that this emphasis on inquiry, on continual analysis, on understanding the facts that are different in different countries and maybe different this year from what they were 3 years ago in the same country are extremely important. The best example I can think of in relation particularly to the Washington Consensus issue, it happened about almost 30 years ago in Botswana, when the end of the diamond and mineral boom in the late 1970s. Commodity prices peaked in the 1980s. It was a collapse in 1981, 82, and Botswana took a huge hit. They had been anticipating this for 5 years and had been building up foreign exchange reserves for 5 years. The IMF made a visit, and they said, well, the fact that you've got 18 months of reserves really doesn't make any difference. You must reduce your budget deficit to this, you must do this, that, and the other thing. And the government said, thank you very much. We'll see you in Washington. And they put together their own set of policy adjustments. And it was worked out, again, in sort of consultation with the technicians and the politicians, and they worked out what was a very tough adjustment process, but it was done very quickly. Not only was the cabinet on board, but the entire parliament was briefed on the analysis. And P.S., it helped that starting 5 years earlier, there had been regular briefings of the cabinet and parliament on macroeconomic policy, adjustment issues, the role of the exchange rate, how monetary policy worked, and so on and so forth. So that by the time a crisis hit, there was an understanding, nobody liked it, but there was an understanding of why this was an issue and what had to be done. And as a result, within about 9 to 12 months, this extremely difficult economic situation had been turned around, and they were back on their trend line of expansion of development spending and so on. So that's just one example, Mr. Chairman. I will cease here and let you go to questions.
Thank you, Steve. I was beginning to worry that I would. I was beginning to worry that people would start referring to me as enforcer rather than chairman. So, so thanks for finishing exactly on time. We do have actually a good 20 minutes plus for questions. So if you would raise your hand, tell us who you are, and state your question, and then I will speak it out again so the tapes can get it and everyone can hear. Yes.
Class of 76, and currently Cochrane Fellow at Amherst College. I'm just spying for Williams. I'm wondering if, given what the speaker said, that the way you framed the debate could be changed slightly. You said the Washington Consensus is still on the table. Mm-hmm. And Danny Roderick is talking to himself obviously today. He and Anand Subramanian came up with an article where they dated the trend in growth rates to around 1982.
Right.
And also suggested that the issue was not pro-market reforms, but pro-business, and that there was an important difference between the two. So that the question may be how to liberalize and privatize and engage with foreign investment, rather than whether to.
You know, I certainly wouldn't argue with that characterization. I mean, except to say that if you go to the question of sort of why the Indian economy accelerated after 1991, it is true that Danny Roderick and I forget the other author have this view, but in fact, there's also a very strong view in Indian economics right now. You can read Jagdish Bhagwati, you can read Arvind Pangaria. In fact, the mainstream view really is that the opening up of trade and liberalization are the accelerators of the growth process. So I guess my view is, and you know, in terms of thinking of what the rest of the panel said also, I mean, there are two issues, which is one is the word Washington consensus kind of going out of vogue? Probably. But a second issue is, can we actually get away from the policy content of the Washington consensus? And I think the answer to that is no. You can make a reasonable case that the acceleration of the Indian economy has something to do with the types of, at least some of the kinds of reforms that the Washington consensus pushed, I think. Yes?
Are there actually examples of the economies that have grown that have not followed the Washington consensus? Because it seems to me that when you look at those that have grown, it is pretty much because of the pro-business attitude and an open attitude. I can't, off the top of my head, think of, perhaps you can, of economies that have not grown this way.
So I guess let me just summarize the question. I forgot to do that the last time. The question really is, are there examples of economies that have not followed Washington consensus policies and still grown? Do I have that right?
About 20 of them.
I can name one.
Okay.
Uzbekistan, it's our neighboring countries, so it's very difficult to get data about this economy. It's quite close economy. But it's interesting, they still don't have uniform exchange rate. They have official and unofficial exchange rate. They didn't privatize big companies. Sometimes they allow for price to grow. So, but for last decade, this economy has growth rate about at least 6%. So it's interesting case to look for the Uzbekistan. I show on the map.
Let me try to answer that last question, because in my presentation I said there's a basket. If you look in the basket within the context of the Washington consensus, there are 10 apples in there. The 10 prescription, 10 apples are in there. Now, when the debate started and you began to implement the debate, issues around the debate, there were countries that looked in that basket and, for example, went into infrastructure development. They went into investment in human capital. But those are things that were in the basket. The question was, the debate got on the floor, and those who were actually supporting or financing this development agenda downplay that particular apple. So countries just left them alone. Instead of debating on 10 apples, they picked one. So you develop your human capital, you develop your fiscal infrastructure, and you work out a good distributive allocation of your resources. That's in the basket. But those who put the basket issue forward were focusing on tax, all those other things. And they downplay what I thought was very effective. And that's what I'm saying. You go in the basket and don't throw the entire basket away. Look in there. There are some apples we can pick. And if necessary, polish them up a little bit or wash the dust off of them, and just eat them. Thank you.
Okay. I'll show the country. I mentioned this one. You can read Uzbekistan.
Let me give just one other response to that question. This is from the case of China. The typical argument that people would advance is that you need secure private property rights of a Western kind for economic growth to occur. Because in part you need to protect resources and revenues from the state. So many people argue that the town and village enterprises in China had a lot to do with the rapid growth. And that was really some kind of collaboration between the local governance and the entrepreneurs. And that in fact, giving the state a piece of the action actually protected you better than keeping the state at a distance and having purely private ownership. So that would be an example again of a non-orthodox institution or an unorthodox institution that actually promoted growth. Yes?
When you look at the Washington Consensus, is it simply a set of policy prescriptions which, if I understand Mr. McIntosh's argument, essentially can be picked among without a lot of interrelationships among them? Or are there commonalities within parts of the Washington Consensus where it's important to move together on several different aspects of them in order to have the most effective development policy in a given country?
Well, if the issue was moving along and adjusting within your own capacities, then that's a good strategic approach to doing that. But the debate was, this is it. That's why we say, those who said it, this is the set. And some people are saying, can that set be made flexible? That was the debate. Can that set be selective? Can that set be applicable to circumstances? That was the debate. Now, it has turned out, in my analysis, what I'm coming up with is, in that basket, don't throw the entire basket away. There are certain things you can even sequence. Because as you move up the development ladder, your capacity to respond effectively to some of those prescriptions. You know, you give a 2-year-old child 3 malaria pills. That child may die. Maybe they need half aspirin at that time. And then years later, you can give them a full aspirin. That is the issue.
Other responses?
I can refer to my practical experience. I was in our government team until 1999 and was responsible for negotiation on public finance. Actually, it worked a little bit different way from practical point of view. Standby programs of IMF, they always refer to the sound macroeconomic policy. IMF never talked about privatization in frameworks of credit what they gave us. Also never talked about increasing of budget to health and education. As regards to the World Bank, if we can consider expanded team, IMF, the World Bank as one team, they always do separate projects. So I never seen comprehensive view from the World Bank on this issue. But later in 2000, they started to work together, and probably this year, former president of the World Bank created a so-called CDF ideas, comprehensive development framework. After that, we can say that they start speaking about these 10 propositions, one package of measures.
Yeah, of course.
My experience in Latin America, they are part of the package that does really fit together. I think there's a general agreement in the region that sound macroeconomic policies are required and they do pay. That is fiscal balance, and there's some flexibility on how you manage that, and good monetary management, and also some independence of the central bank. And I think there's a general agreement that the macroeconomic policies associated with the Washington Consensus, including trade liberalization, is a package, and the package works well. I think much more of the debate has been associated with the role of the bank, the role of the government on promoting accelerated growth. The fact, I think there was an overreaction during the Washington Consensus in saying the best policy, industrial policy, is not policy at all. and the intervention of the government should be minimum. And I think that is one of the things that are being discussed currently. At least in my region, I don't think there's a huge debate about the basic of the Washington consensus regarding macroeconomics are sound, and of course you have to adjust them. I think there's much more to do with this, how you improve growth and how you make sure the trickle down didn't happen. So how you tackle higher productivity and address the issue of poverty. But at least in my region, I think there's a consensus that was, nobody will dare to go and print money again to finance a government without having a reaction, even from the people in the streets. And I tell you that in Peru and in Argentina, where they live through hyperinflation, people do know the cost of such policies. So yes, I think part of the Washington consensus is a little package. But there's a lot of things that I think were attached ideologically to the Washington consensus. Sometimes I wonder if that was not a good idea, if that was to be called, I don't know, the Helsinki consensus, the Cairo consensus, would attract much less attention, but it become kind of a magnet for everything that some of the countries ideologically would not like to feel coming from the US, and I think the whole thing got a little bit more complicated. The other thing is that you have countries that do say that they are doing the Washington consensus, that they don't. They do have programs with the IMF, but they don't comply. Or you have the others, and I'd like to mention Bolivia, that is perceived as the one that is getting away from Washington, but nevertheless the macroeconomics are very sound. So there's, I think, a full spectrum of situations, but I think the Washington consensus move us in the region forward into a much more stable environment for development.
Yes, Andy Weiss. Yeah.
Can I ask the panelists what specific things they got out of the experience at the CDE that helped them in their careers?
Okay, I should remember to repeat this question. Andy just asked the panelists if they could remember specific things they learned at the CDE that helped them in the...
Not just learn anything about it,
Okay.
more broadly defined.
Okay, just anything about life, your visit to the CDE, your time at the CDE that helped you in your careers.
The specific that be interested.
Okay, so we have... Steve didn't go to the CDE. No.
But he
We have three other people.
But he walked the corridors of CDE. You know, I don't know, but I thought we had a discussion this morning with Professor Bruton, and we made some comments in those directions. We talked about the analytical skills we picked up. We talked about the little rivalry and with other people and so forth. But as you were asking the question, I was just playing around today. I went in the handbook. You know, when we come up, we put up these how we call them, yearbook, right? And I went there to answer that question, because that was the question I was trying to answer in my statement in the yearbook. Let me just read it very short.
Yes, please.
And that will answer from my perspective. And I quote, the allocation of our last 6,576 hours. That's what we spend in our hall and around here. 6,576 hours to meet the academic, climatic, and social demands of the center typifies an exercise of resource allocation in a small, closed economy. No doubt, the experience developed from this assignment is worth all of Robinson Crusoe's, who was on the island, and may come in handy in our years ahead. And they did. Thank you.
My career probably really interesting case. I was before CDE took some high position in the government. So what I received a CDE, it's skill of freely speaking, discussing economic issues. And after CDE, I came to the firm decision never go back to the government. Even I received 2 tempting offers to be a Minister of Finance, so I rejected directly from hands of the presidents. Why? Because I won't criticize the government for doing bad things. Being inside the government, it is impossible. So I want to be free. It's CDE spirit that I got.
In my case, I think I can point out 3 things and a half. The first one is that I got an excellent training on economics, which was good. I didn't have the money nor the intention of doing a PhD, but I have the type of good quality economic courses that will allow me to understand what was going on, what was the frontier of things happening, and I became an informed person to know what was going on at a very, very high academic level without knowing the details, and being able to grab the apples that I need. The part of that to do a better work in economics. So I think the training was excellent without going into a PhD program, and all the time the apply side of it, including there's no good policy if you cannot implement it well, was an important part. The second thing that I mentioned in my remarks is that there was really a permanent tension in saying, think what you're thinking, what you're saying. Do not take anything for granted. There's no Washington consensus type of seal of quality that will protect you from thinking all the time, even for things that seems to be so basic. And I think that training, coming from very intelligent professors, was really illuminating, and the kind of thing that you should be doing. And you get a little bit of the heavy weight of, maybe I'm not all this PhD. I said, no, even the best PhD should explain what are the rationale of what they propose. I think that created a middle management, if you want, working back in Latin America, well prepared to do policy. And we wanted to be in the first line, the infantry, but we wanted to be well prepared. The other thing that is very hard to explain is the fact that you get together with people from such a different ends of the world, with such a different traditions from all type, economics, culture, history, really opens like a window for you. And you start doubting everything. It becomes a very humbling experience. Occasionally when you live in a small country, you think that you understand everything, and then you discover that you don't know anything. You become more tolerant, you become more open to ideas, and I think, honestly, you become a better human being to listen to different voices. And when you go to your countries, and it, of course, is the case of mine, you have very segmented regions and segmented levels of income. And then you become to be very respectful. Every voice is a voice that matters. And the other, which is the half, is that for me was devastating winter in Williams. And I remember when the sun came back, and actually the sun that warms, that for me coming from the tropics was very disconcerting, having a sun that didn't do, it was like underemployment or something. So it was fantastic to say there's always hope, even in the most difficult situations.
We're more or less out of time. If there's one last question, we'll take it. If not, thank you all.
Can I just suggest, in response to which countries, there's Danny Roderick, and then there's Haji Chan, Robert Wade, Alice Sampson. They've all been talking about Korea, Taiwan, as actually cases of heterodox development. So it would be interesting to look at their work. And it wasn't necessarily Washington consensus that did it.
Okay, that was the last comment. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.